Welcome to Lit Happens, Unpacking Senior English. I'm Adriel.
And I'm Belle.
We're experienced English teachers dedicated to supporting both new and experienced educators in a world in which we are often time poor, to empower our students to excel in their English studies.
If you're an English teacher, like us, navigating this curriculum, then this podcast is designed with you in mind. And our mission really is to break down the complexities by unpacking English nationally.
Welcome back, Lit Happens, our listeners, our loyal listeners, to episode 43. We are now into the crux of our new exploration of the new courses coming in. And today we're going to be exploring the Reading to Write Standard course. Joining me this morning, we have Belinda, or Belle, sorry. Oh my goodness, I use your first name there, Belle.
That's fine. Yes. All good.
But no, welcome. How are you going?
Thank you. I'm doing well. I'm doing well, thanks. Everyone's getting into a new term now. It's just, never ending, isn't it? Everyone I talk to, it's just like full steam ahead with their new year 12s and starting to prep for their new year 11 course next year. It's busy but exciting times, I think. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. As we were sort of discussing off air there, I feel like I'm chasing my tail quite a bit, as we all feel like we may be in term 4, with reports coming in, with marking, with other things like life admin, getting ready for Christmas, planning what you're doing on the Christmas break. The important things, I would say. These are the important 100%. Things that we all need to be considering. But no, definitely been going well. HSC marking will be starting soon as well, which will be interesting. And that's probably a nice little precursor into our little quit for this morning. So last week we discussed English paper 1. Well, by and behold, today we are looking at Lit or Quit, English paper 2 for the HSC 2025. So I know that, it may not be accessible, but I'm sure we've heard little birdies and our students sort of tell us what the paper was like. So what do you think, Belle? Lit or quit, from what you've heard?
I liked the paper. But I noticed the questions had a lot of what I would call like embellishments. It wasn't just your like straightforward question or just your straightforward 20 marker. There was a lot happening in that paper, which I like from a teacher's perspective, because I think it gives your students who have been working really hard and trying to really engage with their text, I feel like those questions will give them a chance to shine. In saying that, I did think it was, a little bit of a tricky paper, which didn't surprise me, I think, because what did we say last week? We're like 7 years into the old prescription. Yeah. Like, how every year it tends to get a little bit more, throws you off a little bit more. What I thought was interesting was some of the, I think it might have been the mod B, where they had extracts from, the core text that you had to respond in detail with. I mean, we have seen that before, but that I think is a really tricky, I feel like that's really made to throw people off, to throw students who have like pre-prepared off, What do you think?
Yeah, I think paper 2 was easier than paper 1. I'm just speaking off the top of my head sort of thing, especially when we look at the essay question for the common module, and the nature in which they sort of asked about their enduring value of the human spirit, or the enduring nature, or whatever it may have been. But
because that wasn't typical paper 1. Yeah,
exactly right. And then we sort of discussed this last week. But paper 2, I think, the students that are prepared and the students that knew their texts really well, I think it definitely would have been a lot easier. I mean, it goes without saying, if you've prepared or prior preparation. This used to be one of those sayings from one of our old PE colleagues. If you're not prepared prior, or you don't have that prior preparation, you got to sort of understand that the performance might be, I won't use the terminology that he used, but I think, when we start to consider, you're going to have a poor performance. Let's put it that way. So if you don't have prior preparation, and then that's probably a little bit of a saying that we always emphasize with our students, So I think this paper two definitely endeared itself better to the kids who will have prepared. And, for us in particular, that would have focused in on our students looking at Ishiguro's work. And, a few other questions as we've heard. There were very specific extracts for Mod B, the critical study, which definitely I would have thrown a few students. It's a good little tip here for teachers. Like, I don't know about you, but I'll often get like, when kids come back at the end of the year, like, so I didn't actually read the whole thing, and I'll be like, yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
That's like generally the response. But it's a good opportunity once again for us to sort of remind our students, make sure you know the text like the back of your hand, not just the introduction or the first 50 pages of the novel that you're studying.
Yes.
You need to know the entire novel, because the extract for artist actually came from the back end of the novel, which, if the kids hadn't read it, they would have been making a lot of inferences and putting A together with X or Y or Z,
That's right.
without having a lot of that knowledge in between. So it's a good opportunity for us to let our students know, make sure you read the text in its entirety, and make sure you read it multiple times, have a go. Advanced text in particular, quite difficult. But let's say you're doing standard English, something like The Curious Incident of the Dog in the Nighttime, which we know is a very popular option amongst many schools. I think, for Mod B, I'm speaking again, I think it's something that all teachers will want to emphasize. But Mod C, I think that was quite interesting as well. There were split sections for both standard and advanced. Actually, standard, I'll have to double check. I know advanced was split, but
12-8, right?
the image, that's correct. 12-8 breakdown for advanced English. But I think the tricky part of this was they needed to use the image that was provided as a central part of their text. So that adaptation with a full imaginative as well was going to be tricky for some students. I know I enjoy the discursive form, because I feel personally that students are naturally inclined to be discursive in the way we talk, the way we write, the way we see things. So to throw that imaginative piece in, again, if kids weren't prepared with something going in, my goodness, it would have been quite difficult. And I'm sure
too much for them to cover.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure lots of markers will just be reading things about a massive clock face with dark shadows.
Yeah. Well, you're going to be marking that section, aren't you, Adriel?
Yeah, that's correct. So
after it's all said and done, we can have a nice chat after it's all said and done. Yeah, I think I know one of my students that I've been supporting who said to me was he said I wasn't surprised so much by the parter, but the 12 and the 8 threw me a bit, because he's like, I had to then cut things out from so I had to on the spot make a decision about how do I condense it a bit. And that can be tricky too, especially when you go in and you're like, I'm just going to write this down. And then suddenly you realize with that split, you physically cannot, or you take away from your 8 marker. I thought that they did a really interesting job, Nessa, with trying to throw people off a bit. And like you said, then you add that motif. That question wasn't for the faint-hearted.
No. And again, it just sort of emphasizes that preparation aspect, which, I appreciate actually. I think it's good. We're encouraging and we're paying students that are prepared. But anyway, let's move forward.
Right? Yeah, let's go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So sorry. I'm rushing a little bit through this.
No, let's go. No, you're not rushing. I'm
ready to get into the standard English. 100%. Alrighty, Bill. So we are moving into the standard English transition to English reading to write unit for year 11.
Yeah.
So we discussed a little bit of the outcomes, and we looked at a little bit of the content breakdown. I guess the question is, what are some of those outcomes, and what is the content with the standard course in particular, as opposed to some things we've already discussed?
Yeah, that's right. As you said last week, we discussed reading to write in the advanced course. So we talked a little bit more about that concept of reading to write there. So we don't want to waste too much time. Go back and listen if you're not familiar. But just looking at this, obviously, if you're doing the standard course, it's this bridge into senior English standard. So We've got this reading to write relationship. It's about this close reading with quality text. Again, that quality text is in there. And the whole point of their close reading is this idea of analyzing, evaluating, responding, and hopefully developing the capacity to not only for them to understand these texts, but to respond perceptively and thoughtfully in their own style of writing within the creative and persuasive formats. But if we're just looking really quickly at this one, it's still got the same 6 outcomes. The difference is the change of verbs, which we talked about last week with advanced as well, and how they transition. But the first few syllabus points 1 to 3 are about language, relationship between text and context. But outcome 1 has the verb analyzes. Outcome 2 and 3 have explains. Okay, and then when you're getting to 4 to 6, it's composes. Obviously, there'll be a transition, an increase in those verb usages for when they go to year 12. But what I like about the verbs they've picked here is very much in line with this idea that the students are transitioning. It doesn't start from the get-go with, it analyzes everything and critically analyzes. Yeah, it's a build, which I quite like, because I think sometimes we overcomplicate and we think, I mean, obviously we want to pitch, in a challenging way to our students, but when you're looking at those outcomes, there's definitely an opportunity to get all your class mates, your students, on the same page, getting their skills covered. I mean, I know last week in our episode, we talked about how you might bridge the gap between the skills that I know we all want our students to have when they start year 11, but perhaps don't, particularly if you're looking at the standard course, you very well may have students in there who possibly are EALD or maybe should be doing studies instead. So I think it's a good reminder that the outcomes are still accessible in this unit. I think it's about how you're going to differentiate. So I can talk a little bit about the content and responding, but I'll just pause a sec for air.
No, all good. I think we'll probably end up discussing that through some of our tips and teacher takeaways later on when we look at implementation as well. But let's move into the I guess the crux of what we want to speak about today with our listeners is, what are some of those text suggestions for study, how they can go about implementing not only the skills as we've sort of just understated with the outcomes, but what are the texts that might offer some of these I guess deep critical sort of ways in which we can look at the construction of text, and also look at how we can show this in our own writing as students, as teachers, and whatnot.
Yeah, I think text selection is really important here. I know that you and I have talked in the last few episodes that we are big advocates for a range or a medley of texts in reading to write, because it does allow you to hit all the different outcomes. And also, if you're very strategic, you would pick a variety of text types in that medley. And then that way you're covering your bases, you're going over the skills, the language, so that students can read those texts, and you're guiding their analysis. And then after you've done that analysis, you're transitioning them to more responding now in both creative and critical ways. So another thing that will be really influencing your text choices, and I know you and I are going to spitball some specific texts that we've done in the past that we really like for reading to write for standard, but again, it's really important to choose a text based on your backward mapping from year 12. So, perhaps you've got a text that has very similar structural features or ideas. That's something that you are going to be doing in the common and or module C. So if you're thinking, well, what do I pick? Don't reinvent the wheel. You and I are also big advocates for that. Have a look at what you've taught before in year 11, when you might have done like belonging, discovery, journeys back in the day. And have a look if there is a text or a unit that you did there that might actually connect quite nicely to something that your students will be studying in year 12. And that will kind of, I think it will bridge a little bit of the work that you have to do. Then you've kind of got some good activities. You're just maybe adjusting them based on the specific content points.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I totally agree with you. You know, like there is no time, first and foremost, to recreate the wheel unless you live on another planet where you can freeze time. So don't
Mhm.
recreate the wheel. Look back at some of the units of work you've already got. If you're a new teacher, I'm sure that there are many more experienced teachers within your faculty um, that have readily available textual sort of study units. A lot of skills-based work as well. Like I know there are many organizations out there that have great readers that have lots of activities within them and content that teachers can use. Now, there is a little bit of I would say this, when you're looking at like reading to write, even craft of writing come year 12, um, sometimes when you get given these texts, we can fall into the trap of just here's the new textbook or here's these activities and you know let's just follow this. Um, I'm sure you're going to agree with this. We're not saying just, basically repurpose an old unit in terms of here's what we did before, don't change anything, just go with it sort
No.
of thing. We're talking about
Mm.
adapting it to
Yes.
the required outcomes and the skills of your reading to write unit. So you're not starting from scratch, but you are still adding that element there of, well, what is it that we want our students to be developing, in order for it to be a stepping stone moving into the Year 12 course, which is what this transition to senior English reading to write unit should function as. So we'll get into, I guess, some of those text suggestions, but yeah, I
Yeah.
really like what you sort of mentioned there. But yeah, what
No,
are some
because
of
I
those
think
suggested texts?
yeah. Yeah,
So
because no,
sorry.
you're right. Because I think no, we're good. We're in sync. No, I was just gonna agree completely and say, I know you and I have talked about how, because a lot of the HSC texts have changed for the new syllabus, that there are some
Mm,
great texts in our HSC list, like Billy Elliot for one, which,
yeah.
is currently in text and human experience, but I don't think it will be in there anymore. And so
Mm,
that perhaps might be a nice text to do in reading to write alongside a medley
yeah.
if you are doing a film study in year 12 and you could
Mm,
teach those
mm,
things there. I know what I really like is I like extracts and like memoirs and medleys of text. So something like
mm,
the happiest refugee from Ando, because you could definitely do,
yeah.
you don't even have to. What I love about this topic and something like that is you don't even need to do the entire text. For
Yeah.
me, in standard, if you're differentiating, I would do an extract or a chapter or a selection of
Mm,
pages, and then that way you could
mm,
really differentiate who gets what. I really like the Growing Up Asian anthology, which has a
mm,
lot of great texts from, a lot of great Asian Australian writers in there.
yeah.
And you're looking at, poems in there. There are also memoirs and write ups and interviews and articles. And I feel like everybody
Mm,
has a bit of a cultural focus in
mm, mm,
their senior unit somewhere. So I really like that. Um,
yeah.
I also like short stories because I think if
Yeah.
you pick a really, specific short story here, you could then also pick a poem that has a similar theme, and then perhaps an
Yeah.
article, a news article that has a similar theme, and perhaps maybe a memoir page. And there's a lot you can do. What I will say is, I think when you're selecting these texts, it does help in reading to write to have like a guiding idea or concept.
Mm,
So
mm,
this might be like culture or perspective or change or
mm,
transformation or belonging or journeys. I don't think there is anything wrong with reusing
yeah.
those as the anchor, because I think particularly for standard English, if your students
Yeah.
don't have like a thematic or a guiding idea to anchor their text and to actually guide
Mm,
their reading of those texts and responding, I feel like it's very easy for the standard students to get lost and be like, well, I'm stuck, because I know I've heard them say, I'm studying this text, I just don't really understand why. So I think even
yeah.
before you get into picking a text, it's very important you designate some kind of idea or issue or whatever as the anchor, and then that gives you a lot more scope for picking your medleys.
Yeah, yeah, I truly agree that you want to be exposing the kids to multiple types of texts, and like you said, you don't need to go through the whole text, but you might, as a teacher, be diligent in selecting or studiously selecting the important parts. So even if you're doing, like, let's say, a big novel,
Mm-hmm.
which we all love, we want to sort of encourage them with reading things. You might look at some of the key moments in that novel, depending on the genre in which you're sort of looking at. And then it goes back to sort of what you're looking at there, Bill. You mentioned the fact that you want to have a guiding sort of thematic focus or concept, or area of study, as we used to call it, that will help students sort of link back to something, especially in the standard course, because they do need it to be a lot more structured for them. And they always ask. There are some keen beans, and if you get them, keen and ready right from the beginning of the course, I think this will definitely serve you well. I in particular would say, a lot of those, let's say, texts from different contextual backgrounds, exposing students
Yeah.
to different experiences, definitely are engaging. Back in the day, we used to do for year 9, as a this is how far we used to backward map sometimes, but in year 9 we used to do a series of voices through the Through My Eyes series, which had a whole heap of different
Beautiful novels.
experiences, and kids used to love this. But that again just depends on what your focus is. If you're taking more of, let's say, a dystopic lens, in terms of some of the short stories that you can be exposed to as well. What are the possibilities? Future worlds. I know we used to do this as well with some of our selections in the Reading to Write course, the last few times that I've taught it. But I think just exposing kids to different texts, modes, and mediums is very, very important, because remember, this is that function. It's like reading to write. It's not just reading a novel to write. It's reading multiple types of text, and this will serve them well in 2 sections of their exam in particular. The unseen texts, I think, is going to be very, very significant, but also when you look at backward mapping from Module C, which is the craft of writing in particular. These are the 2 units which this Reading to Write Transition to Senior English module works to sort of build towards. But also mod, like all of them really. I'm just sort of pointing out 2. But yeah, look, some texts, I really like poetry. So you can have a whole heap of poems for your students and really engage them with it. Short stories, novellas, definitely work
I
as
was
well.
going to say, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
I like
novellas.
The Simple Gift is a great novella for this one, because it's written in that little vignette kind of style, and it's quite lovely and it's quite accessible. And it's also that Australian voice.
Yeah, that's where we're sort of going. No, 100%. I think some of those things, because sometimes you can get bogged down in trying to finish a novel in a 10-week term, and you may not get through it. I know, or in term 1 as well, as kids do transition to senior English, it's one of those things where if they are pumped with just a very dense, heavy text right from the get-go, you might turn them off. As much as we might love some of those novels, you might switch them off mentally. Really get them into like exposing different types of activities. We know this in the classroom as our pedagogy as well. If we were to do one activity for 70 minutes straight, depending on how long your period is, it's not pedagogically sound. You want to be splitting, breaking up the times. You want to be looking at different aspects. You want to be looking at language. You want to be getting them to practice their skill. You want to be guiding their practice as well as a teacher. And similarly, as we look at these texts and the selection of text, because this is what the scope is, you can choose whatever. We're just giving you a few sort of genre outlines here. Do what works for you, but also keep in the back of your mind what has been done before so that your resources are available. But also, what do you think is relevant to the kids in your demographic?
Yes,
I think
absolutely.
that's very significant. It's very significant for them to engage with the text. But yeah, did you have any, I know you just mentioned the Simple Gift. Did you have any other sort of
suggestions?
text that,
Yeah, just quickly, if you're looking for an Indigenous perspective, you could do something like Sister Heart. That's quite good. There's a lot of First Nations poetry that you could align that with. I also love poetry for reading to write because I think poetry is a really easy and obvious way of getting them to know all the figurative language and stuff like that. So, and you know which one I still love to this day. The last time I taught it was for literacy year 10, but the story of Tom Brennan. God, I love that text because there's just something so accessible about it, you know.
Yeah.
And even though that's quite a big novel, I've actually taught it before in just key chapters and sections, and it was still
Mm,
very effective. I think there's
mm,
so many beautiful texts out there. Like I'm sure there's 100
yeah.
more you could list as well. But I think what we just want everyone to have that key takeaway is you don't have to start from scratch. If you already have something that aligns nicely, you will obviously do your adapting. But also the most important thing you said was you need to be mindful of, well, what are my students going to be able to read and engage
Mm,
with? Because if we can't get them to connect with it, they're not going to meaningfully respond critically or creatively. So yeah,
yeah.
that's always the
Yeah.
big, what is something that has meat to it but is also very accessible and yeah, effective for your class.
Yeah, 100%. I personally would say things like Tim Winton's texts about the Australian voices. I
Yes.
think they're
Yeah.
fantastic as well.
Mhm.
And then again, you mentioned this thing about like the Asian sort of Australian voices, which is obviously one of the things that if you've sat the standard course for mod A, language identity and culture, you will have seen quite a few of these voices coming through. I like Happiest Refugee. That's a wonderful text. I know Ando's got many resources, like when he's got that show as well, where you're
Yeah.
painting with
Pictures of
Ando. You've got
oh yeah, Nando. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
you've got the SBS digital essay
Boat.
there online, which is called The Boat, I think it is.
Mhm.
Yeah. So you can
Mhm.
definitely expose kids to multiple lenses. We just mentioned a few there, but whatever is relevant. So, like, say for example, I'm teaching in the southwest of Sydney. I'm going to have a specific demographic there with maybe a different sort of breakdown with what kids might be interested in. So my texts might revolve around that. And then honestly, I'll say this, and we'll probably move on to like this next question that we have. Like, what are some of those activities and
I think so.
um,
Yeah.
sort of things that we can do in the classroom. But as a teacher, we want to sort of consider, well, what are those practical sort of, things that our kids will engage with? So give a selection of text, and this is what we keep harping on about, which will then allow for your writing activities, which we're going to discuss in a second here, to bridge that sort of gap between that reading and writing. So
Mhm.
in saying that, Bill, what are some of those practical, maybe actionable activities that do
Yeah.
bridge that gap between reading and writing,
Yeah.
and that align with our module's outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think when you are doing the close reading, you have to lead by example here. You have to imitate the close reading. You'd be surprised how many students get to senior English and are like, I don't understand how and why we close read. So you very much have to model that with the class. You could have different strategies with that too, left hand side for techniques, right hand side for analysis points, or you could even engage in like technique HUDs. So where you give a table of techniques and then you throw it back on the kids and all right, everyone has 10 minutes to find 5 different techniques. If you have to scaffold that further because you have students going, what's a technique? Then you might go through some 3, 4, 5 big techniques in there, make sure students understand it, then give them the time to go and find one each within there. This could be pair work, group work. I think you have to read with the kids with this one. I don't think this is the topic where you can say, go and read it at home over a few weeks and then bring it back. I think it's really this in this module at least, I would do something start to finish. That doesn't mean you have
Yeah,
to read the entire text start to finish, but whatever bit you want them to read, I think as a teacher, you have to be reading and modeling it with them. I think
yeah,
getting kids, engaged, actually coming up on the board and annotating their points on there, it gives them a lot of confidence and power to do it.
mm,
And then I think, yeah. And then I think when you are doing a close reading, this is where you can heavily scaffold. You can
yeah,
create analysis tables. You can create body paragraphs. This is a great opportunity to go over your school's writing platform as a class. I'm a big fan of writing with some scaffolding, so like having sentence stems and even options of the specific meta language we would use when we're analytically examining something, and then perhaps writing an analytical body paragraph. So even that transition of portrays, conveys, illustrates, I think when you just put it on there very open for them and very clearly, and then you literally go circle the word, you're going to pick this one, and then actually reading aloud. I think the most powerful thing you said last week was writing with the kids. So this is definitely a unit where if we're doing body paragraphs, yes, I will model a sample on the board, I will do one with them, but then I will do activities. You write one, I write one, and then we read them. We read a few. I think that's really powerful. Sometimes I'll just go around the room and I'll note some really good ones, and I'll give kids that positive feedback and then say, can I read it out loud? It's a really great paragraph. And I think that takes their pressure off. I think they have this thing in their head where it can't possibly be correct. But I think once you start that sharing, I mean, close reading is very much like, for me, a relationship. And so it's not something that they need to do in isolation right now. If you're looking at those outcomes, they're still in that explaining phase. And there's no reason why that you guys can't explain as a group until that evolves initially. But I think it's very important here, when you're modeling that close reading, not just what is the language feature, but what is it doing? How is it functioning? Because I think that's the bit that most students can explain a technique, but some of them can't really analyze it. And so bridging that gap between how we move from an explain to an analyze can be very powerful.
Yeah, I think it's really good that you sort of mentioned that, and then there is power when you model it for people, because like one of the questions you probably ask is, well, what if I ask a student to share their response and they've just got absolutely nothing, or they've just, I don't want to do it, sir, or I don't want to do it, miss. Like teachers may ask, like, what are some strategies to help engage that writing activity? And this is where it comes back. If you are writing with the kids and you are modeling responses with them, the first few times you might do this, I'm going to say the first few lessons where you will be putting in that time and effort with the kids, you'll write yourself, but it just shows you, and in saying that, you want to foster an environment which really engages this sort of, everyone's going to be giving it a go sort of thing. There's no, like, everyone's going to make mistakes. You may even purposely put some mistakes in there yourself and like, oh, whoops, sorry, like, I didn't see that. And some of us may do it intentionally, some of us may do it unknowingly, but that's part of being human. But that's also showing you the process of what writing is, and it's okay to fail, it's okay to make mistakes. It's just when we identify those mistakes, you can then be like, okay, cool, now I need to go and address that. And when you model that to the students, then they're going to be like, oh, okay, actually, sir or miss, they're human as well. And you like, I emphasize this with the kids. I'll say, it's a process for me as well. If I am not making mistakes, I'm some sort of AI machine, who I'm definitely not, who may have no mistakes in my vocabulary. That's completely incorrect. So when you have shown the students that you have that vulnerability in terms of are willing to make mistakes and are willing to actually work with them, that will give your students a little bit of that encouragement then to, give things a go and be more readily sort of open to share. You're going to see this, especially when, you might use, I know some teachers use like the paddle pop stick sort of thing with each kid's name on it, or you might use the wheel to select a person to read, the spinny wheel thing.
That's a great idea.
And again, to avoid
Love
that.
that.
Yeah, and again, to avoid that sort of, oh, I didn't write anything, or like, everyone will be involved in the writing process, and you hopefully have then fostered that environment where people are wanting to ask questions, are wanting to share their responses, because they know in sharing their responses, there is this collective reflection, not only from themselves, but their peers and the teacher. I know one thing I'll often get is one kid that you'll always find one or two kids that will be keen to share. And then, as you go through the reflection process, like, I'll have a student, sir, can you check this? And they'll often try and come in like doing it quietly, but I'll do the opposite. I'm like, all right, read it out aloud. So then it's like they read it out aloud, and I kid you not, it's daunting at first, but then you give them that constructive feedback, and then you might do these writing activities that allow this. This is going back to the question. But right after that first kid has shared, I kid you not, you'll have 6 or 7 other kids wanting to read
Mm,
their responses
mm, mm.
because they've seen, okay, cool. Actually, that person got this feedback. What can I get? I can see the value in reading this out loud. I can see the value in
Yeah,
sharing my responses. And yeah, that's one of my sort of classroom
I love
suggestions
that.
for teachers. Yeah,
I love that because they learn off of each other in that way. And
yeah,
that's something really similar as well that I do when we do the creative writing. So then you want to like
mm,
transition into the responding. Yes, there is an element of critical responding, and you might do a bit of an essay with the kids and just cover that, but definitely
yeah,
the creative writing here is important too. So I
yeah,
know that a lot of teachers like to do like little free writes or journaling in the first 10 minutes of a lesson. That might work if you have
mm,
kids that do want to get some ideas down. If you do have
yeah,
students though that like are a little bit struggling with the creative writing component, break it
mm,
down into its sections and chunk it. So even if you spend a week doing more atmospheric openings where they're just
mm,
establishing maybe setting and or character, and as a prompt you can use a persona from the related text that you covered with them in the reading component.
yeah,
You could identify 3 techniques that you analyze with them in that text and say to them, we looked at these and I want you to try and incorporate this in your opening. And unless students start, they won't really get going with that. I remember I had a really disengaged group, and I just took them outside and sit them outside, and we were very fortunate. We had a very lovely school with,
mm,
beautiful oak trees around and beautiful native birds hanging around. And so
mm,
I would take them outside and just try and engage those 5 senses. Okay, right now I want
yeah,
you to focus on what you see, and I want you to write a sentence or 2 describing. I want you to what you hear,
mm,
and you can prompt as much as you want from that. You can take away from that. I know something that I've done to take the pressure off as a group activity, and it's always very funny. It's not so much a quality activity, but it's a very fun, gets the pressure off. I actually get them to
mm,
get in groups of 5, and I'll give a little prompt for, I want you to introduce character, and then I'll guide them a bit, and then I'll let them write, okay, stop, pass it to the next person. And then they've all got to add to
yeah,
the story. And by the end, maybe the story itself is not really highbrow, but the activity stands in their mind and they get that there's different parts of creating a narrative. So
yeah,
yeah, I'm also a big proponent with the creative writing that you do have to guide and write with them as well. I
mm,
can't just say, write me a story about this, and then like the kids are just not going to do that. I know we would love them to do that. I know we probably did that more when we were in high
yeah,
school, but
mm,
reality of the social circumstance right now is they don't often have a lot of imaginative ideas floating around in their mind, just because they're very passive in their technological consumption. But once we
mm,
can guide them and we start fostering that imagination with them, again, it's a process, but I'm a big
yeah.
proponent of working on that process, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and that's fantastic. We're sort of looking at activities that guide the students to want to enjoy reading and writing, and that sort of takes us to our next sort of question here, or
Hmm.
next part. What are some of those tips and suggestions then for our
Yeah.
students? Just very
Hmm.
quickly, we can probably go through some of those
Yeah.
key points that
Okay.
will help
Yeah.
our students
Yeah.
in particular.
Well, because it is the reading to write topic, your students has to say, how can I read like a writer? And that's looking at the purpose and the function of what is written there. So not just what is the story about on a plot level, but why is it happening? Why has it been put together this way? Why did the author use this language form to express that over another? So this is very much looking at how the getting into the writer's mind a little bit about what they might have been trying to achieve. And this aligns very nicely with like year 12 craft of writing, this idea
Mm,
of crafting. So yeah, you're building the skills of looking at how we craft something. Writing a lot, often, continuously is huge in this one. So if if you feel like, oh, I've spent quite a few lessons now just chalk and talk a little bit and analyzing the text, which I actually quite like. I
mm,
don't have a problem with that. But maybe in this unit, thinking about balancing this. So a little bit of chalk and talk, but a little bit of getting the students to actually write and respond and gather their thoughts on their paper. That will allow for reflection, because I know reflection on this crafting and writing process is also a big part of this unit, because most people in their assessment will have a reflection component that goes with whatever creative piece you've asked the student to write. And so I think if they're not given time to think and write and process, then their reflections are not going to be very strong, because then you can also tell between who just wrote a story for the sake of writing it versus who wrote it with intent and purpose behind it, because you can see that in their reflections, can't you? But yeah, I think you need to be really deliberate in this unit as well, because, you know, there's only so much time. Deliberate about the texts the students are engaging with. Explain to them why you've picked these texts for them to engage, what you want. There's no reason why you can't preempt. And I love this text because of the way it conveys this and how powerfully it uses this technique. Like, why not preempt? We don't have to let them work everything out. Set that ground level and then let them get into the text, and then see when I said this, you can see how it's happening here. I think it's very important to be deliberate in this unit and build those skills that are going to form good habits for when they're in year 12.
Yeah, I think that's probably the big one. I love my main emphasis would be just write, experiment, write. Yeah, that's a skill you're sort of working with. And read and write. That's the unit. Like, that's my tips.
Wow.
Was
100%.
just make sure you guys are reading and make sure you're writing. Like, you can't just expect things to happen if you were to read for 1 minute and, you know, a week sort of thing. Like, just if you look at it practically as a student, if you're a student listening to this, I think I always use this analogy, and I love it. The kids are actually telling me it works. So I enjoy going to the gym, for example, and if I was to, you know, build my strength in the gym, I'm thinking, here I am, I can go load 200 kilos on a bench press bar. If I was to have that initial 200 kilos and try and lift that, obviously I would lift. No, that's a bit of the joke. But what's really going to happen is I'm going to get crushed by that weight, you know, that crushing feeling. And, you know, that's what you're going to feel like as a student. If you're not putting any of that work in and you just go load up straight away and sit your assessment task, you're going to get crushed by your expectations, everyone else's expectations, and you're going to feel like it's overwhelming, you know, and you literally will just give up then. Whereas if you have someone that will go to the gym and they'll build, let's say, 20 kilos on their bar, you know, after the first week, and they add another 20 kilos, and then they keep going, you know, you're slowly building your strength, you're building your memory. And this is the thing, if you read and you write regularly, maybe in different increments through the course of the term, you're going to see that compile or that compound effect. You know, it's one of those lessons that has happened throughout time and history, but we just want to visualize it sometimes. So there you go. If you're, you know, a teacher speaking to your students, try and find something that works, that really emphasizes that compound image of hard work consistently, not just hard work a week before the assessment task is due. Because I think that's something that, you know, we want to be speaking about in terms of for our students. Those are the big tips. But, you know, that probably then links into, for our teachers, you know, this last little part here. What are some of the takeaways and implementation ideas, Belle, that, you know, we might get our students and our teachers to sort of structure their units around? What do you think?
From a technical standpoint, you want to know what your outcomes are, what your content points are. So the understanding and the responding bits, they're embedded within the actual syllabus. So you'll be able to find those there. Technically, you might align those to those phases of learning that the department has put up. I think there was like 9 or 10 of them for stage 6. Very similar to the ones, you know, we were shown when we were doing the junior syllabus, but there is that elevation now. I think those phases are wonderful if you're like, I've got all these activities that hit my content points, but how do I sequence them? Use those phases to sequence. We might even do an entire episode just on that, to be honest, Adriel. That might be helpful, but that's okay. Well, maybe that's good for the future. But that's a technical way to organize everything and then pop in your text and then your activities and make sure it's all connected. But otherwise, I think what we need to be thinking about, what I think about when I do this unit, is how I transition the kids from that reading to writing, because we want them to see the connection. So that doesn't mean that you can't do any writing within your reading phase. It's more about how you connect those things, that they make sense. They're not just a random, today we're reading, tomorrow we're writing, that they have to be quite connected here. So when they're reading something, you might actually get them to identify that language and the structure, what stood out, what they liked. Because remember, this is all about getting a bit of a toolkit or exemplars for good writing. So what they like, and then, springboarding off of that. What's really lovely is to use those texts that you've picked. And then once you've done a more analytical reading of those texts, transitioning into how can we respond creatively? Could you take a scenario or a character and write something? Could you actually, maybe you did a poem, could you actually represent that poem in more of a narrative form now, or in an atmospheric opening? So yeah, I think this is where, if we're thinking about not just reading in isolation or writing in isolation, but this idea is that we're reading these texts so that we can use them to springboard and create our own writing skills and develop our own writing. And I think in this one as well, probably the other big thing I would say is monitoring student progress here, to see that they are transitioning through that reading to writing. So like you said, right, completely agree. This is a good unit where you could create little rubrics for what the students are writing. It might just be one writing activity a week, because we all don't have time to just sit and write all day long as much as we'd love to. So maybe you focus on, in this week, this is my text and this is my writing activity and this is the rubric or criteria, and students can do their individual reflection. Then they can do a peer reflection. Then a teacher could kind of look at that rubric with them. So because I think if we don't do that, they might not see how this is going to be an important skill for the rest of their stage 6 course and going into module C as well.
Yeah, I definitely think, like, when we're looking at this, more so with our standard kids, which is, for teacher takeaways here, kids want guidance. So I know I
Yes.
sat with a few kids recently and they were like, "So, I sit there and I try and study for English, but I just don't know why." And then it's like, "But you give me all of these guiding prompts or questions." And that just made me think the other day. One of the kids actually asked, he's just like, "Can you just write a list of all of these prompts? So if I'm feeling this is the question that I should ask myself." And you might actually put these in your unit of work or your scope and sequence. And I like this thing that you've just mentioned before, write, implementing sort of different parts. And also the fact that in reality, we're not going to be able to check 20 or so papers every
No.
single week or day. So
Yeah,
your activities
right.
need to be based on a lot of peer reflection. So you might spend maybe 20, 30 minutes in your first lesson of that week, depending on the skill that you're trying to sort of develop for the kids, really modeling, this is what a good response looks like. This is how this skill will look like in a band 5 or 6 sort of way. Give them some sort of practical sort of scaffold where you've put in the work, you've done this in your implementation stage. And then the kids have like a blueprint, which then they can use as a peer review sort of tool later on down the track. That will save you. I know I've sort
Love
of
that.
just been mentioning this. I said, have study groups. I've encouraged a lot of my kids,
Yes.
if you are really interested,
Yes.
do your study groups and where you can discuss all of these things. So for us, our role
Yes.
as a teacher then is, well, how can we foster these study groups? How can we get the kids talking about the work, but not just relying on their teacher voice? Because
Yes.
you don't want a series of responses that just reflect your voice. You want a
That's
series
right.
of responses that reflect the student's individual voice. And that's where we need to be mindful in the way we implement our activities and writing sort of platforms and whatnot that we have throughout the term. But I guess what I'm trying to say is the reading to write unit gives us so much scope in order to explore with these things. But in essence, instead of having it as a teacher focused thing, which I am so prone to be doing because I'm just passionate about what I like, I can fall into that trap. But we need the kids to be writing. We need
Yeah.
them to be addressing the skill of reading, and we need to be seeing that. We need to be seeing that development, which is what you sort of mentioned there before. So when we implement activities, we need to be very intentional in the way we really try and foster those skills for our students. But yeah, I love what you've been saying, Belle. Thank you so much for, just going through all of these sorts of strategies, text suggestions. Hopefully this helps our standard sort of cohorts and teachers implementing things. Now, what we've sort of said today, again, we've had 3 episodes now on reading to write, a general episode, one on advanced English, one on standard English now. And all of them really reflect this idea of, the transition to senior English. We're going to see lots and lots of different approaches to this. And it's up to you as a teacher to sort of see what is working in your school, what is working in your area, what is happening with maybe kids that, are coming to you as kids that are wanting help in the form of your own students or tutoring or whatever it may be. And you culminate all of that together and then, you can develop your plan. Now, in saying that, you're not going to develop the most effective program right off the bat. Remember, the program acts as a basis for us to, inform our teaching. So you're always going to be adapting. You're always going to be reflecting on it. If I harp back on the old days when we had to annotate all of our programs and our notes and whatnot, for professional development there. Yeah, for our folders and all that sort of stuff. I mean, that's the purpose there. So it's just, how we continually increasing our pedagogy. Yes, it seems like extra work, but honestly, you put in that groundwork, it's going to show in the classroom. You're going to want to have kids who want to have you as a teacher as well, which is always very, very encouraging for us as well. That's why we sort of teach. But any last thoughts or comments there, Belle?
I think this is just, like you said, spot on. It's the bridge into senior English, getting them to understand that the foundational stuff now is the good habits for senior English across all their modules. So try and hit the ground running as much as you can. And it's a beautiful unit to get to know your students a bit better as well and their own likes and dislikes. There's no reason why you can't ask them what type of texts or, genres that they're interested in and then use that to dabble a bit with their writing as well. There's a lot of fun to be had here, I think. But yeah, you said everything beautifully.
No, awesome. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode here, guys. Hopefully you guys are enjoying our ramblings and our thoughts and ideas about the different texts. Just as a little bit of a side note here, we did say this episode was only supposed to be half an hour long, but we apologize.
Sorry,
it's gone to about 54 minutes. It just shows you, we enjoy the talking, we enjoy the discourse, and hopefully people are enjoying sort of some of the insights that we've had in our, I'm going to say, our mid-range careers at the moment. We're probably not at the upper echelons of some experience, but we're definitely not newbies in our craft here anymore. But yeah, look, thanks guys for listening. Remember to find us on our socials, like and subscribe to things, give us some ideas. I know people are starting to comment through on different ideas that we can speak about. We've got plenty more to talk about in the next few weeks, months, maybe years. We'll see how we go and how this sort of continues going. But yeah, be sure to check out our resources. We have resources coming out. The wonderful Belle has been developing some awesome things that will be available soon. So keep an eye out on our socials as to where you can access them. We have some awesome things coming and in store. But thank you once again for listening. Thank you for your support. And we will be back next week, bright and early, with a new Lit or Quit or Lit Happens episode on who knows what at the moment. But we'll be here.
We'll be here. Bye.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.